Hello and welcome everyone to the launch of the Evidence for Gender in Education resource. I am Erin Ganju, Managing Director of Echidna Giving. In light of the unprecedented times we are in with the COVID-19 global pandemic, we are sincerely grateful to you for making the time to be with us today, and we hope that you are all safe and healthy. We are also very excited to preview the Evidence of Gender in Education resource, or EGER as we will be calling it for short, with you today, and we hope that this new resource during this challenging time will help bring our global education community together and support further collaboration. There has been an incredible interest in this new resource with hundreds of people joining us today for this webinar. So as people continue to dial in, we want to take a moment to learn more about you. And as Jennifer mentioned, please go to menti.com and use the code 438844 to answer your first question, which is what region are you based in? So please answer that question, and as those results are being calculated, we'll come back to that, but in the meanwhile, I want to introduce today's speakers. We've had an incredible partnership with the Population Council, who has worked tirelessly to create EGER. Today you'll hear from Stephanie Psaki, the Director of the Council's Girl Innovation Research and Learning Center, or Girl Center, and Nicole Haberland, a Senior Associate at the Council, and Meredith Kozak, a Research Analyst at the Council. After that, we'll hear from Alison Pollard of the Department for International Development, who will talk a bit about how EGER can inform investments, and then Martha Muhwezi of the Forum for African Women Educationalists, who will share how EGER can inform practice and how practice can inform EGER. And then finally, Matthew Jukes of RTI International will reflect on EGER as a resource for the gender and education community. So now let's take a look back and see where everyone on the webinar is joining us from. So as you can see from the screen, we have quite a large gathering from North America, and then we have some colleagues from Europe as well, and then scattered throughout other regions. Sub-Saharan Africa is a good showing, and will continue to grow, I'm sure, as people join us. We are sort of expecting a little bit of this breakdown given the time zone, and are planning to have a second webinar for colleagues based in Asia and East Africa further, so we're not surprised we have a heavier showing from North America and Europe today. So moving forward, I want to share a little bit about Echidna Giving's learning journey. We at Echidna Giving have, as I mentioned, shared this wonderful pleasure of partnering with Pop Council to create EGER, because our sole aim as a private funder is to support quality, gender-sensitive education for both boys and girls in lower-income countries. We've been funding work in the gender and education space for over 10 years, yet we still struggle with fundamental questions around how do we connect evidence and impact in our sector. We're continually asking ourselves, do we really know what works best for girls at different stages in their education life cycle? Where has the world made progress in helping girls succeed? And where are there persistent gaps and challenges? Why is it so hard to connect the work of many nonprofits with rigorous evidence? And why do funders continue struggling to understand what is best to fund? Where should we be seeking to scale up strong evidence-based programs, and where should we fund new innovative approaches? And we thought that perhaps if we're struggling ourselves to understand, maybe others are also struggling. So we decided that we wanted to create a resource for the whole community. The goals of undertaking the creation of this open and accessible database of the key stakeholders in the gender and education sector globally, as well as a systematic review of the evidence, is to help drive two things. First, to drive more focus on and smarter investments in better evidence-based programming, and second, to build new collaborations and partnerships to drive progress forward. So we at Echidna Giving still very much feel that we're on a learning journey, not so much about why girls' education is important. I think we all know and agree on the why, but really about how to best use education as a strategy to support girls and boys in their education. So with that, I will now hand it over to Stephanie and her team to share more about EGER.
Great, thank you so much, Erin. And I really want to echo Erin in thanking all of you for joining us today, especially in such difficult circumstances for so many around the world. We're really hopeful, as Erin said, that this new resource can help bring our community together at a time when we can't be in the same space. As Erin mentioned, this work has been led by the Girl Center at the Population Council, which is a global hub of research and thought leadership that generates, synthesizes, and translates evidence to ensure investments in adolescents and young people, especially girls, are based on rigorous evidence. And although the Girl Center focuses on adolescent girls, this resource is broader. It includes information relevant to girls and boys from early childhood through early adulthood. So the work of the Girl Center is focused on expanding opportunities, and a key part of that work is making sure young people have access to high-quality education around the world. So as you all probably know, there has been enormous progress in expanding access to school globally and in achieving gender equality in education. As of 2015, UNESCO declared that gender parity had been achieved globally in primary and secondary attainment. But as you also know, in many places, gender gaps remain and progress in attainment has stagnated. Levels of literacy and numeracy are often very low, even among young people who attend primary school. And of course, new barriers are emerging. According to UNESCO, school closures in response to COVID-19 are affecting more than 90% of the student population globally. So in different ways, we're all working to address these remaining barriers to progress in gender and education globally. And the goal of EGER is to help all of us to do that work more effectively. So we would love to hear from you about the biggest challenges that you're facing in your work. As a reminder, you can go to menti.com, enter the 6-digit code on the screen, and share your reflections on challenges. So in the meantime, while you're all doing that, I'm going to tell you how we're thinking about the problems our community faces. And this is based on many conversations with all of you over the last few years. So what we've heard is that funders want to know how to make the best investments with the greatest impact, especially when there are so many barriers to tackle. Both researchers and those implementing programs on the ground find it challenging to know who is doing what and where, and what the evidence tells us about what works and for whom. And linked with this, policymakers want data that tell them where the problems are greatest and what the best solutions are to address those problems. So taken together, what we've heard is that there's a lack of effective coordination and communication among these groups. So let's step back for a minute and hear what you all have said about the biggest challenges that you're facing in your work. So it looks like the answers are still coming in, but all of these are challenges that you're facing. Perhaps finding evidence of what works is in the lead, but finding the right partners, finding funding, and sharing your organization's work with others is also a challenge. So I'm happy to say that EGER is designed to address all of these challenges head on, and we'll share more about that in a moment. So the goal, as I said, is to foster connections between organizations and programs to help identify where needs are greatest and to curate evidence about what works for whom and ultimately drive smarter investments. So all of us on this webinar are committed to expanding opportunities for young people around the world. And while we of course know that no single website can do that on its own, we believe that EGER is a critical step on our shared journey to achieving that goal. So I'm sure you're all anxious to just see the website, and I'm going to hand it over to my colleague Meredith in just a minute to walk you through the site itself. But first, I want to quickly give an overview of the information that's included. So we've initially focused on low and middle income countries for all of this information, and we're approaching this from the perspective of 3 core pillars of information. Where are the needs greatest? What is current practice? And what is the evidence of what works? So first, on the needs, we've included information on where the gender and education needs are greatest, drawing largely on Sustainable Development Goal indicators. And in terms of current practice, we have mapped who is doing what and where in global gender and education. To do that, we've initially focused on organizations that meet 3 criteria. They work in more than one country, they have an annual operating budget of about $1 million US, and they work to address gender and education. We've defined addressing gender and education pretty broadly to capture any work that might help address gender-related barriers to education, including practices like child marriage. And we've started with these larger global organizations just to maintain a manageable scope initially, but we look forward to engaging with you about ways we can expand this work. So moving on to the third pillar of information, which is evidence of what works. And the evidence that's included in EGER comes both from the existing literature as well as from a new systematic review that we're finalizing now. So you're probably wondering how we know what works and how we're making that assessment. And we could spend the full hour discussing our approach to evidence, but I'm just going to summarize it quickly, and we're happy to talk more. So in terms of existing evidence, we're pulling in results from recent systematic reviews, and we're rating the strength of evidence for each approach and outcome pair. So for example, we could ask whether teacher training works to improve literacy, or we could ask whether teacher training works to improve grade attainment. We're also addressing a gap in the evidence through a new systematic review that is looking specifically at interventions designed to address gender-related barriers to schooling. The full results from that review should be out in the coming months, but some preliminary findings are included in the site. So in both cases of existing evidence and the new systematic review, we've tried to maintain rigorous standards of evidence, which also means that results from some individual studies or the gray literature are not fully represented here. And as I said, we're looking forward to continuing to engage with you all in the coming months about the best ways to keep building on this work. So before I turn over to Meredith to finally show the site, I just want to ask one more question. And again, you can share your responses on menti.com. And that question is, what are the most common gender-related barriers to education in the settings where you work? So in designing, let me tell you a little bit about how we're thinking about this idea. As we've designed our systematic review, we had to put together a framework outlining perceived gender-related barriers to schooling. And much of this framework comes from work that many of your organizations have done. So we're thinking about perceived barriers in terms of how they impact three different levels: the community, the school, and the household. For example, norms around child marriage might be a gender-related barrier at the community level, gender-insensitive curricula might be a barrier at the school level, and poverty might be a barrier at the household level. And in reality, of course, these barriers are all closely connected. So let's go and see what you all have shared about the barriers you face in your work. Great. So the font is a bit small since there are a lot of barriers, but we can see that the most common responses are lack of support for girls' education, child marriage, and then behind that, school-related gender-based violence, financial constraints, gender-insensitive school environments, perhaps inadequate life skills and pedagogical practices that discourage girls. But it does sound like you're seeing all of these barriers in different ways play out in the context where you work. So I'm happy to turn over to my colleague Meredith, who will walk you through the live site so you can continue to explore on your own. And as you explore, please bear in mind that this site is live, but it's a work in progress. And we wanted to soft launch the site to give you all a chance to interact with it and to share feedback while we continue to add data and, of course, fix bugs here and there, and while we continue to add more data visualization tools in the coming months. So with your input, we look forward to a full launch this fall, along with the Gender and Education Roadmap, which Erin will talk about later. So I'm now going to hand it over to Meredith to finally show us how the site works.
Thanks, Stephanie. If you'd like to follow along in our live demonstration, please feel free to enter the URL at the bottom of your screen, www.egerresource.org, into your internet browser. Alrighty. I hope everyone's with us on this page now, but welcome everyone to EGER. As Stephanie mentioned, this resource brings three different kinds of data together to provide a 360-degree view of the gender and education space. EGER is composed of three distinct yet interconnected parts: the profiles, data visualizations, and the evidence to practice tool. But to get to know the resource better, let's start with the building blocks of EGER, the profiles. Users can find details on over 250 organizations and 500 programs that are currently active in the gender and education space. We are always adding new profiles, so check back often. Peruse the list of profiles here, or search for a specific organization to find out more. The organizational profiles provided general information regarding who this organization is in the gender and education space. This green check next to the organization name means that the information has been verified by the organization itself. There is no check mark. The profile contains data we've extracted from publicly available websites and materials. From the organization profile, a user can find a better sense of this organization's areas of work, any partners or funders an organization may collaborate with, background information on this particular organization, and any current gender and education activities this particular organization may be affiliated with. If you'd like to explore a particular program further, click on any of the projects listed here to view their program profile. As you can see, similar to the organizational profiles, users can find details on specific gender and education program, including what topics the program addresses, who the program is targeted towards, and what approaches are being used to reach this program's specific goals. But let's say you'd like to explore what's happening in the gender and education space from a bird's eye view. Head to our data visualizations page to explore who's doing what and where through our table and map visualizations. Choose the table builder to get a curated list of organizations or programs. If you know what you're looking for, you can create your own table by selecting the parameters you'd like to filter by and the columns you'd like to display. Or if you'd simply like to explore the database, select one of our preset tables on the left. And voila, your table is generated. You can always refine or expand your table by using the Adjust Results menu on the right-hand side of your screen. In the future, users will be able to download their results into an Excel or CSV file. While the table provides a great way to explore who's doing what in the gender and education space, perhaps you're more interested in where these activities are being implemented and how that compares to needs on the ground. That's where the map visualization comes in handy. Similar to the table, the map builder allows you to explore a preset map or create your own by filtering programs based on the parameters you set. You can also shade your map based on select needs indicators, which use Sustainable Development Indicator data. And create your map. Once your map is generated, you can explore the programs and activities taking place in a particular country or region. Each program on the map is represented using a small marker. The green circles with the numbers in the middle are consolidated program markers for programs taking place at the country level. Click on any program marker to get more information on a particular program, as well as a link to its program profile. You can also check out programs taking place at the global level by clicking on this blue circle here, or take a look at the regional level programs represented by the purple circles. The last element of EGER is our evidence to practice tool. This tool takes research evidence from diverse disciplines and distills complex results into simple to use messages on what works in gender and education. In this tool, you can explore which approaches are most effective to achieve a specific outcome, or if you're already using a specific approach and you'd like to see which outcomes this approach affects, you can search outcomes. So say we want to know what approaches work to improve girls' literacy. You can select Increase Literacy from the drop-down menu here and view results. EGER then shows a list of hypothesized approaches and the level of evidence that's associated with each of our selected outcome. It also reveals where data are available and the level of evidence disaggregated by girls and for boys. Expanding a row provides links to the research that the evidence is drawn from. You can click on any of the research tiles to see a summary of our particular study. To learn more about EGER, please explore our About page. Here you can learn more about the different aspects of the web portal and how EGER was created. To get regular EGER updates, head to our Join Us page where you can join our mailing list or send us suggestions for how we can make this the most useful resource for the gender and education community. And with that, I'd like to hand it off to my colleague, Nicole Haberland, who will share some of our findings from using EGER.
Thanks so much, Meredith. Hello, everyone. Before we explore EGER further, I just want to say to everyone on this webinar that one of the most rewarding things about this project has been learning about the amazing work that you all have underway. Passion, creativity, and commitment to making education accessible for all and a force for equality and well-being is truly inspiring. It's an incredible portfolio of work here. So while we'll continue to expand the database of programs and evidence that underlies EGER, we have enough data now entered to start seeing the emerging contours of the gender and education field. Now the field is organic and will undoubtedly continue to grow and shift, and EGER itself is dynamic and will reflect those changes. But let's see what's emerging now. Using the Venn diagram Stephanie introduced as a frame, let's take a look at the alignment and synergies, as well as the gaps and disconnects between needs, practice, and evidence. Let's start with the practice and evidence domains. So one of the hypothesized gender-related barriers to education is social and gender norms. This slide shows a table we generated of programs that address social and gender norms in their activities. They may include media campaigns, work with community leaders, community mobilization, engaging parents, or other approaches. We find that 84 organizations and 163 current programs address social norms. This includes 104 projects, 19 advocacy campaigns, 15 funding initiatives, and 19 studies. But what does the evidence say? Certainly, changing harmful and restrictive norms has intrinsic value and has been linked with improved health outcomes, but do such efforts affect education outcomes? Here, our robust effort is not, or not yet, backed up by rigorous evidence. We'll see if this shifts as more studies examining this link publish their results, but as of yet, the effects of social norms change on education outcomes is unknown, meaning there has not been a systematic review or meta-analysis conducted on these types of interventions, or, as in the case of engaging parents, more research is needed. Now, what about an example exploring alignment between need and practice? Child marriage is another example of a gender-related barrier to education that has rightly garnered considerable attention. This shows a map of current programs, child marriage programs, juxtaposed with rates of child marriage. The darker the color, the greater the proportion of girls married before age 18. Now, if we drill down to look at differential child marriage prevalence rates, Niger, as you probably all know, has one of the highest rates of child marriage in sub-Saharan Africa in the world. 76% of young women aged 20 to 24 were married before they turned 18. In contrast, child marriage rates in Ghana, not great, but they're about a third of the rate of Niger's. Yet there are more current programs addressing child marriage in Ghana than in Niger. Clearly, there is a bit of a mismatch here. Now let's use this Venn diagram to explore an activity in terms of alignment across all three domains: needs, practice, and evidence. So conditional cash transfers, or CCTs, to individuals and households have promising or effective evidence rankings for a number of our education outcomes, including increased enrollment in primary school and reduced absenteeism. CCTs to individuals have also been shown to be promising for progression to secondary school. But in sub-Saharan Africa, where the rates of progression are among the lowest in the world, of the 19 programs that include a focus on primary to secondary transition, only one uses CCTs. So evidence and need are aligned, but practice is not. And this is not to say that all programs should only use CCTs. If we did that, we'd never innovate new effective interventions. But it's obviously a critical consideration, especially when thinking about replication and scale up. So again, these observations of gaps and alignments are preliminary and may shift as more programs and studies come online and EGER's database expands. but there's enough already logged to get a sense of the state of the field, its promise, and its gaps. So hope you all have as much fun exploring EGER as we do. And with that, I'm delighted to pass it on to Alison Pollard. Thanks so much.
An evaluation lead in the girls' education team at DFID. And I'm delighted to be here and participating in the launch and the seminar about EGER. So first of all, I'd like to say robust and accessible evidence is extremely important to us from a kind of a funding perspective, because it supports us to ensure efficient use of resources, to make the most impactful and relevant decisions about our investments, and maximise value for money, both from kind of a donor perspective and supporting our intended beneficiaries. So the UK's Department for International Development leads the UK's work to end extreme poverty and tackle some of the major global challenges that we're witnessing at the moment. And for the UK, we see ourselves very much as a world leader in supporting girls' education and championing the right of all girls to access quality education by 2030. And our education policy focuses on improving the quality of education provided, ensuring children and young people are able to learn maths, reading skills as well as wider life skills developments, and also supporting systemic reform to ensure that education systems are more accountable, more effective, and more inclusive. And so an example of one programme that we fund is DFID's Girls Education Challenge Fund. And we launched this in May 2012. It's one of our flagship girls' education programmes, and it's the largest global fund dedicated to girls' education. And we supported 820,000 girls to gain literacy and numeracy skills in the first phase of the Girls' Education Challenge Fund. And the first phase ended in 2017, and now we're currently in the second phase. And DFID has provided £500 million funding over an 8-year period. And through our funding, we aim to support up to 1.5 million girls in 17 different countries. So if I move on to consider how EGER might be able to or will be able to support our work, so one area we're thinking of how to improve our investments and to tackle school-based violence, gender-based violence in schools. We would be able to use the tool to try and understand what is the evidence base, to try and understand which funders, which programs are trying to tackle gender-based school violence. And as a commissioner and as a funder, we will be able to use this data, this analysis, and this comprehensive assessment to support our decisions about where we see the gaps are for future research, where we need to invest and design programs to address these gaps in evidence for our own needs. So it ensures and supports our evidence base and evidence plans to be much more kind of comprehensive, contributing to the global evidence base and filling gaps that need to be filled. So with a quick search, I was quite easy to identify that whilst there are a large number of organisations working to address gender-based violence within schools, there's quite a large gap in evidence about what works to tackle school-based gender-based violence and also to deliver educational outcomes. And that type of information is extremely useful to me as somebody who works in a large funding agency that makes decisions about grants as well as research and evaluation plans to help kind of formulate and support my design of my future work. Great, so now I would like to hand over to Martha.
Yeah, thank you, Alison, and hi to everyone. My name is Martha, and I'm the Executive Director of the Forum for African Women Education, which is FAWE. And I joined the team to share with you how EGER can inform practice, and also looking at it on the other side, how practice can inform EGER. Yeah, maybe just to start off, I would just like to provide a very quick overview about FAWE. FAWE is the Forum for African Women Educationalists. It's a Pan-African organization with a headquarters in Nairobi, Kenya. And we have presence in 34 countries across 33 countries across the African continent, and we are mainly in sub-Saharan Africa. And just talking about FAWE, it's an organization that was established by 5 female ministers of education then, and who were in argument, if we are to receive education for all, then it is very important to have deliberate efforts that address the barriers that deter girls from getting into school. And when we look at FAWE, the mission is addressing the gender disparities in education, looking at it from the human rights perspective. And the vision of FAWE is to ensure that gender disparities in education are significantly reduced, and having more girls access education, complete their studies, and perform well at all levels. And when we look at the mission, and this involves all key stakeholders, FAWE with the partners work towards creating positive social attitudes, policies and practices that promote equity for girls in terms of access, retention, performance, and ensuring that quality education. And we also work in looking at policies to ensure that all the policies transform education and they're gender responsive. And when we are looking at the FAWE work, there are a number of interventions that FAWE does develop to ensure that the girls are given opportunities, equal opportunities to get into education. And one of the key interventions that I'm able to share today is about the gender responsive pedagogy. And this is a model that works towards equipping the teachers, educationalists, with the skills that are able to enable them teach from a gender perspective, to ensure that as they teach, they pay attention to the needs of the girls and the needs of the boys. And this way, it works towards building the capacities of the teachers to provide quality education to all, motivate girls and not demotivate girls, because it has been realized that some of the girls drop out of school because of the way they are taught and the kind of messages that they receive from the teachers. So this is the model that FAWE developed way back in 2005, which has been revamped now. Looking at the period of time, there's a new toolkit effective 2019, which is also equipping teachers but incorporating the new trends in education. And when we talk about education for girls, we look at education at all levels. We look at education from primary school, we look at secondary school, we look at early childhood education. We also look at higher institutions of learning. And when we are talking about through the EGER program, we're able to do a mapping of primary school completion rates and the programs. In other words, looking at where there is need and what the exact practice is. And one of the things that was discovered, which is perennial challenge for many organizations, just like FAWE, is ensuring that all the FAWE chapters in the 34 chapters in the 33 countries are able to have the required resources to be able to implement the activities that do promote girls' education. But if the resources are not available, it becomes a very big challenge. And when we look at the map, The map shows us the sub-Saharan Africa with countries shaded by girls' primary school completion levels. When you look at the dark colors, which they represent higher levels of primary and school completion. And then the green markers show the number of programs per country that are aiming to improve primary school completion. Ideally, the programs would be concentrated. If you look at the way the marks, the dots are, the programs will be concentrated in the countries where there is need, where the needs are greatest. But this, through the findings, this is not the case. You'll find that some of the programs are concentrated in areas where there is less need. And this means we are not looking at the need versus the interventions. Most of the interventions are concentrated in areas where there is less need, and then some of the interventions are concentrated in some of the areas which have the greatest need have very few programs of intervention, and that in its sense disadvantages some of the areas as compared to the others. And maybe going to looking at aligning practice and the need, because we have been looking at the primary school, but also when we look at aligning practice and need, you will see that looking still at girls' primary school completion, looking at the findings that came out through the mapping process, you realize that when you're aligning practice and need, some of the areas, just like I've said, may have great need, but the intervention is low. If you look, for instance, at Benin, the findings indicate that 44% of girls complete primary school, but when it goes to looking at interventions, you find that there are only 2 programs which are addressing primary school completion in Benin. And when you go to Rwanda, for example, you'll realize that 61% of girls complete primary school. But again, looking at the intervention, much as Rwanda has 61% of the girls completing and Benin has 44%, Rwanda has 6 programs which address these issues. And that's where now there is the imbalance in terms of providing support in aligning practice and need. And this means that organizations that fund gender in education, for instance, if we go to Benin again, you'll find there are 7 funders that are looking at gender and education. And when we look at the EGER finding team, for instance, the team also realized that the sites that does not include every single program. When we look at what has been given as examples, it has not covered all the programs. And but this comparison is consistent with the challenges that we face in our work, where you find that some of the areas where the need is least, there are so many funders that are into that area. And then some of the countries where there is the greatest need, many of the funders may not want to go there because in some cases, the implementation of programs is determined by the funding priorities. So you find that in most cases, those that are into implementation may not have control over what program should go to which region and who should be implementing what program. So that brings about also a high level of imbalance in terms of aligning practice and the need. And of course, while there are many reasons that the donors and international organizations decide to work in a specific country, this in itself creates a disconnect between the implementation and the need, or the alignment of the greatest need in relation to the programs that are being implemented. And this in itself now, it's a wake-up call in terms of reaching the most vulnerable girls. It's a wake-up call to all of us as the implementers, and it's also to all of us as the funders. It's important that we think of where there is greatest need, so that when we are allocating resources, that is taken into consideration. Otherwise, you'll find so many organizations in one area doing the same thing, while there is an area that has the need, but then there is no funder within those areas. And I look forward to all of us looking at, based on the findings that have come out, all of us being able to use the resources, use the information that is available for us to be able to align the practice and need. Thank you so much, and I will stop at that and pass on to Matthew.
Hi there, everyone. Thanks so much for the opportunity to speak on this panel. It's really a privilege to be able to reflect on such an impressive piece of work. I think not only in terms of just the amount of technical work that's gone into compiling the indicators and impact evaluations and profiles of programs and organizations, but also just putting it together in such a usable form. I had privileged access for a couple of days to play around with this website, and I've had a lot of fun, and just the usability of it, being able to map things out, summarize evidence by outcome or by approach. It's really so useful. And I'm really excited just about the potential this has as well going forward, that I know that there's more work to be done in gathering evidence that there's, at the moment, we're restricted to meta-analyses, and individual studies will be brought in. So I think this is a framework in which more and more evidence can be gathered. This just has such potential going forward. So huge kudos to the POC Council and also to the Echidna Foundation. I think this is really a great example of how a foundation can transform a field with a really well thought through focused project. I want to talk about a little bit about how I think making decisions on the basis of evidence is really complex, and how this resource can help and how it can be more helpful going forward. And I also want to talk about how making decisions from evidence is really quite simple, and this tool can help us avoid making the sort of most basic mistakes in evidence and use of evidence. So I'm going to start at the simple end. And I think the first thing is that decisions are better when we use evidence. It's an obvious point, and it's interesting to see that the poll at the beginning of this this webinar suggested that finding evidence was the biggest challenge for most of the people, although admittedly this may be a self-selecting audience. And I know that policymakers often find it difficult to find evidence and get frustrated with the ambiguous conclusions that researchers come to, and then there's big danger in there. And I think there's a tendency in development policy to follow assumptions or fashions. I love that example that Nicole gave about the number of programs targeted on gender norms without the corresponding evidence. Or as the review that Dave Evans conducted last year, that's included in the tool, prompted us to consider about whether programs to improve girls' education should be specifically targeted at girls or rather than all children. So just the use of evidence and the mapping of programs to need using those kind of indicator surveys. It's also such a simple idea and just so powerful. When I've ever looked at GIS mapping of research taking place around Africa, I've always noticed that there's a cluster of projects near glamorous capital cities or beaches. And so in some ways, it shouldn't be a revolutionary idea, but somehow it is, to put research and programs where they're needed. And this tool is just such a fantastic way to identify where the need is. A couple of other things that I think are really simple about the use of evidence. One that really gets overlooked is to stop doing what doesn't work. And it's great to see that this tool has a category of interventions that have been tested repeatedly and found not to work, which I think is so valuable. I think it's probably missing from a lot of systematic reviews consideration of that point, but it's so good that it's included in this tool. And at the other end, to do what has been consistently shown to work everywhere and is cost effective. And I don't think cost is included in the tool yet, but that is a simple thing to act on. And also, as Alison was talking about, as a funder, to know where the evidence gaps are. This idea of mapping evidence and looking for evidence gaps, I think, has been really powerful in the field in the last decade or so. And rather than just funding what's fashionable and what others are funding, to really look for the need is a way this tool will be useful. Then just to turn to the things that I think are really quite complex about evidence and need a lot of thought to apply what's in this tool to make good decisions. The first is to think about what works in your context. And I think it isn't enough just to see what has worked elsewhere, although that's a useful guide. We need to think about what is the barrier that the program is addressing, what is the mechanism it uses, and what is the outcome it produces. It helps us understand where an intervention is contextually variable, contextually appropriate to one's context. But I think there's so much in the tool that helps us with that. I love the sort of classification by the barrier that's addressing, and I know that the systematic review that's coming out soon from the POC Council will do that too. And also being able to map how programs relate to specific outcomes. But I think that isn't the whole story, and there's still a lot more in terms of culture and maybe gender attitudes that could be important to understand the context in which these programs should operate. And I think it would be great to have a narrative, and I know that this is planned for this tool to have a narrative description around the interventions, about the must-know factors about an intervention. What do you need to know about it beyond the simple impact evaluation before one thinks about implementing it? The other thing is the question of whether one should try and implement a program for which evidence isn't conclusive. And really, my reading of some of the systematic reviews, if you were to restrict yourself to acting on programs that really had solid evidence from systematic reviews, you might just be doing teacher training and conditional cash transfer programs, which is clearly not the outcome we want. So where can one take risk? And I think also Erin mentioned this in the decisions that the foundation are making, balancing the investment in proven approaches versus thinking about innovation. I just wanted to mention a couple of things that I think really help with this decision. One is to report more thoroughly on the potential harms of interventions. It's something that medicine does incredibly well, and we don't do very well in social policy. And I think being explicit about the harms or the lack of harms gives people a lot more confidence to take risks, because if you know that there's good studies that rule out harmful side effects of interventions, like, for example, increased risk of violence to girls by keeping them in school, then it gives you a little more freedom to be innovative. And the other is to think about the extent of the evidence, like to what extent has the innovation or the intervention been tested already? And what are the limitations to gathering evidence? For example, you could argue that strengthening education systems has the greatest potential to impact girls, but it's difficult to gather evidence, and that kind of intervention won't be appearing in any of the systematic reviews. So there's a lot of questions that I think the team at the Population Council could try and answer. I think one approach is to try and answer those questions in this tool. Another is perhaps just to pose them and have an accompanying guide to help people navigate the evidence and to think about it. I think would be a useful addition. But I hope that's helpful, and I'm really just thrilled to be part of this panel, and I'm so impressed with the work. Thank you.
Thank you, Matthew, so much for the thoughtful reflections, and also to all our presenters for the discussion so far. It's very exciting to see how this can be a valuable shared resource for all of us. Now that everyone has had a chance to preview EGER, we hope that you can see how it can be a resource for the whole gender and education community. And most importantly, we hope that you will join us in being involved in EGER. For EGER to function as a real action-oriented resource that we intend it to be, it needs to contain the most up-to-date and useful information on the community, and we need to be sure the community is aware of it. So we genuinely want to know what you think about it and how it's useful to you. We'd love if you have been able to explore it, to share it, as you see here on the screen, different ways to join us. If your organization or program is not included and you'd like to be, please reach out. If you have feedback or suggestions on organizations or programs to add, please reach out. And of course, please share this resource far and wide within your own networks to get more people using it. This is the first introduction of EGER. It's a living resource for sure, and will be updated with information about ongoing programs continuously, as we've all shared. And we want all of you to know that we are very committed as Echidna Giving to continue to support EGER as long as the education field uses it and finds it a valuable resource in supporting your work. And I think as evidenced by the participation of our panelists today and the information in EGER, donors and partners are very committed to keeping this a living resource that continues to grow. So please do share your thoughts and feedback. The Population Council team will be sharing new data visualizations in the coming months. There's also work on a roadmap, as Matthew was just mentioning, sort of an accompanying guide, if you will, for the gender and education field that will be coming out in the fall of 2020, most likely around October, which will pull together some of the more important findings from this work and share recommendations for the gender and education community. The goal of the roadmap is really to drive progress and momentum and to focus on the things that need to be focused on so that we can all learn together. So we will also be hosting a second webinar in the coming weeks at an earlier time to accommodate partners in Asia and Africa. So more to come on that, but again, please share EGER as a resource. And as Stephanie mentioned, EGER may be a website, but if we all take a part in it and collaborate to make it as helpful as possible, it can be something much more. It can be a critical step on our way to ushering in a new and better future for girls and boys around the world. So as we open it up to Q&A from the audience, we'd like to ask for your feedback one more time on menti.com. The question now is, can you share your reaction to EGER in one word? And again, you can go to menti.com and use the code 438844. Again, what is your reaction to EGER in one word? And as we look for your reactions, I'll hand it back over to Jennifer to remind the audience how to ask a question and to engage a little bit more.
Great. Thanks, Erin. Thanks, Al. It looks like we've got not as much time as we were hoping for Q&A, but we still have some time. We've got about 6 minutes left. And we've had a handful of questions come in. Just as a reminder, to ask a question, use the bottom of your screen with the Q&A function to type a question in. And I just wanted to start off with a handful of questions. We've got some practical questions, and then we've got some more substantive questions. So let's start with some of the easy ones first. And this question is likely for Meredith. What is the process for updating information on a particular organization?
Thanks, Jennifer. Yes, so we're also in the process of creating a more advanced login system, but that will be hopefully being unveiled later in the coming months. But if you'd like to update your information, please reach out on our Join Us page. Just send us a quick email saying what organization you're from, and either if you'd like to update or add your organizational profile or update or add a program profile. And we'd be happy to get back to you as soon as possible and send you the materials for doing so.
Great. And one more for you, Meredith. We have someone, it looks like from Pakistan, who's interested in how to learn about EGER programs in Pakistan.
Yes, so as Stephanie mentioned, we've currently been mapping programs that are taking place at the global and regional levels, and we're having discussions potentially moving forward on how we can incorporate more country-level programs. But if you'd like to use either the map tool or the table tool, you can filter by country as well. So that's an option too. Or reach out again, and we can always answer your questions via email as well.
Great. Another question likely for Stephanie. How are you classifying the evidence between effective, promising, and more research needed? Can you go over that classification again?
Sure, yeah. It's a great question, and we have details on that if you click on the About tab on the website, which is live now. But basically, as I mentioned, we're using right now just systematic reviews and meta-analyses. So, for example, we've classified something as proven if there are 2 systematic reviews, or I think 1 meta-analysis, I have to go and look, that has shown overall that there is a significant effect in the expected direction of an approach outcome pair. So that's kind of in the weeds. You can look at the breakdown for each section online, but I think the biggest, and Matthew alluded to this, and I think the biggest area where we're looking to expand this going forward is thinking about how to integrate the results from individual studies in a systematic way. Maybe I'll leave it there for now.
Great. Thanks. A couple other questions that came in. one person said they were really glad to see that child marriage is included. Does EGER also include data and evidence related to young mothers and educational outcomes?
Sure, I can give a quick answer to that. So one of the ways that we've tried to ask people about programs or pull out information about programs is to break them down not just by the main groups that they're aiming to reach, so for example, girls in school or girls out of school or teachers, but we've also asked about specific populations or subpopulations that programs are designed to address. So in some cases, the one option is young mothers. There's also students with disabilities, people living in conflict-affected settings. There's all different ways to break it down, and we can always add more categories. But as Erin said, we're really dependent on all of you to share more information about the work that you're doing and make sure that this is as accurate as possible, because it's sometimes difficult to pull out those details from information available online.
And then I'll actually, sadly, we only have just a couple minutes left to keep to the hour. So Erin will direct these last two questions to you, and then I'll hand it to you for your wrap-up. But one question is for you is, how do you envision the COVID-19 epidemic affecting work in the field, and how will this resource be maintained moving forward?
Great, thanks, Jennifer. Well, I think certainly the COVID-19 question is on all of our minds, and is something that I'm not sure any of us can fully answer at this point, given it's still an unfolding crisis. But we do feel that, and we have been starting to think about ways that we might be able to use a resource like this to help understand what is happening where and where the needs are, and perhaps build collaborations that could be useful. So we are thinking about that because, as we all know, crises like this often impact the most marginalized, and women and girls, and certainly girls in education from past crises that we've seen in Ebola and others, are often the most at risk for not being able to be re-engaged and re-enter school once open. So we're thinking there are ways that maybe we can find collaborations and be able to kind of help map that. So we're more to come on that, and we'd love to hear if you have suggestions or ideas. Please be in touch and share your thoughts. In terms of sustainability, it's something we're very committed to. We've, along with Pop Council and many of the advisors and partners that have already shared information, a lot of time has gone into building EGER, and we think that there's huge value, but we want to make sure that it continues to be used. And from the funding perspective, Echidna is very committed to helping support it for several years in the future, especially as we get the roadmap coming out and helping to drive progress in the gender and education community. We also really welcome others that may want to think about ways to add, whether it be additional country perspectives or thematic perspectives, others that may want to also help support this resource and join us as a collaborator on the funding side. But be assured that your time and investment in your effort to be in EGER will be something that we're committed to ensuring pays off for all of us and for the entire gender and education community. So with that, I know we've come up on the hour. So we have an additional feedback space on menti.com that we would love to hear your reflections, thoughts, questions, suggestions as a way to continue to engage with this very important community to us. We thank everyone for your great questions and participation throughout the webinar, and a special thanks to all our presenters and their thoughts. We'll follow up by email with everyone, providing a link to EGER, and please share that widely in your networks. And we look forward to hearing from all of you as you have a chance to get into EGER and use it and learn from it and share what you're finding and where you'd like to see more. We believe that, again, driving progress in education forward is something that as key stakeholders is a responsibility for all of us. And as we all know, when children learn equally, the world becomes more equal too. So thank you for joining us today and for participating. And with that, we will sign off. Goodbye.